Welcome to the Give for Grouse podcast, dedicated to giving the ruffed grouse a voice by promoting sound wildlife management, advocating for forest health, and championing all things conservation. Now let's get to the show with Cody Altizer and Eric Long. Welcome to the Give for Grouse podcast. As the intro stated, I am Eric Long, brother from another mother down in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mr. Cody Altizer, the myth, the legend, the one and only. How's Cody?
Right as rain. I believe we might be getting some. It has been a sweltering 100+ degree day today.
Yeah.
And I just looked at the radar and it is a big band of red and yellow coming across the Virginia-West Virginia line. Yeah. So I will happily take it because we are parched here in the Commonwealth. We could use a drink.
Yeah. It was, I don't know when this is going to air. Today is June 12th. And this week was what we call a several shirt days.
Mm-hmm.
By yesterday, I think it was 9:30, and I had to switch shirts.
Yeah.
Planting corn. It was crazy. It was nuts, man. So yeah, we've had several shirts kind of days. It's hot, miserable. Just been getting a little rain, nothing tornadic, nothing crazy. So we could always use rain. You hate to, complain about it, but it hits in my neck of the woods. You see that big red chartreuse in Illinois, and it gets to Indiana, and about Indianapolis, you can tell it just, and it gets to Ohio, Indiana line, and it just disappears. And it's so frustrating. And it's June, and that's happening already. So it's going to be my crystal ball says we're going to be in bed. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in bad shape down here right now, for sure. The entire state of Virginia is in a drought. We are in severe drought. We got a good soaking rain, good growing rain about 2 weeks ago, like a couple inches.
Yeah.
That briefly brought us out of exceptional into severe on the drought monitor, but it is way too early to be this dry, way too early to be this hot. But hopefully we'll get a shot of rain today. It got stuck in a thunderstorm yesterday. I was up hanging out with our buddy Caleb Haynes, and I was wondering, wonder what the grouse are doing. I miss them.
Right?
Yeah.
I tell you what, I haven't seen mine on cameras. I don't know,
it's so
man.
darn thick up there where I was filming them. I'm like, my goodness. Caleb and I saw, there's only one poult. I imagine there were more. But just all the work that they do, all the burning, all the forest management, so much vegetation. It's like, how does anything pull one of those hens or chicks or grouse or turkeys? Well, no kidding.
That's what happened, Cody. They burn them all up.
There ain't nothing left. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about that. I was up there because I hadn't been up there since you and I were up there doing some filming. And, of course, hadn't filmed them for a while. Drumming season is over, more or less, I would imagine. It's like, I wonder what the grouse are doing. Looking to the sky.
Of you as much as you are thinking of them.
Do you think they think about me while I'm thinking about them? As I look out the window as the rain trickles down the window. I wonder if they're thinking about me. But no. Quick homework items. We'll do the stickers. If it pleases you.
Yes.
Process is the same as it always has been. Leave us a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Take a screenshot of it. Send it to us to prove to us that you did. 5-star rating or review. We'll send you in return a free sticker, grouse holding a chainsaw, or a bobwhite quail holding a drip torch. Soon to come will be a ruffed grouse holding a drip torch. That is on the to-do list. All we need from you to receive one of these sweet stickers is a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Or $100. Either one.
Sure. Why stop at 100? Make it a clean 2. I like even numbers.
Yeah.
Today's podcast
and we have merch.
Guest. Yeah, we do have merch. Sorry, I was
excited merch
about the guest. T-shirts of the same design, $25. Hoodies of the same design, $30. If you want a hoodie, order a size up because they run a little bit small. Just DM us. Let us know what size you want. and the t-shirt or a hoodie of a grouse holding a chainsaw.
Yeah.
Pretty sweet
All right.
deal. Today's
So,
guest
yes.
is one that he's been on, we've mentioned it in the Rolodex of guests. Bill Winke and Ruffed
all
Grouse,
people.
right? A lot of symmetry to this episode, which we'll touch base on when we get him on. But Gift for Grouse hadn't existed yet. It was around this time last year, and I watch all of Bill's stuff. Going back to the Midwest whitetail days, just always enjoyed his content. Even when I was a kid, there were two people I looked up to, Charlie Alsheimer and Bill Winke, in terms of writing and photography. And then, of course, transitioning into the video, always enjoyed Bill's stuff. Now he's got a farm in Northeast Iowa, and he produces, a series of videos on his YouTube channel with he and his daughter, and he's got some interns or some helpers who help manage the property. But it's just, I love it. Just wholesome, not overly produced, just good old-fashioned management, habitat, hunting videos. And I watch basically every single one. But this time last year, sat down in my chair to have a sandwich at lunch, scrolling through YouTube to see what video I wanted to watch that day, and up pops Bill Winke and a ruffed grouse. Bill made a video about ruffed grouse in Northeast Iowa, and I was just tickled pink about it. Mainly because, somebody like Bill with his platform was, educating and advocating for the ruffed grouse. And, Bill, as I'm sure he'll admit, the majority of his audience, the majority of his content, and rightfully so, is deer and deer hunting. But for him to take the time to use his platform to give ruffed grouse a voice, I thought was just the coolest thing. And I remember calling you and telling you about it and told you to watch the video. And ever since then, since we started this podcast, he's been somebody I've wanted to talk to.
Yep, for sure. So I think instead of just rambling on, I think we just need to get him on, because I'm sure the conversation is going to be pretty. I am looking forward to this. I can't. I've always watched him from afar, admired him from afar, because he is different than the other people, the other industry people, if you will. So, but without further ado.
All righty, Mr. Bill Winke, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. How are you, Cody?
I am cooking. My thermometer says 103 in Virginia today. I hope it is a little bit cooler where you are in Northeast Iowa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's in the upper 70s.
Oh, my gosh.
I should have done it outside. I couldn't find a comfortable spot to sit where I could have put the hills in the background and a little breeze. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. Right now, I mean, it can get pretty humid and hot here too, but today's a good one.
Man, I tell you, we have been in a weird weather whirlwind the last few years. It's hot, and I tell you, Virginia seems like it's turned into Kansas almost. We're always hot, we're always dry, we're always windy. But not to sound like three old men talking about the weather. We'll get to the good stuff. Just to preface it a little bit, if you're unfamiliar with Bill Winke, you've been living under a rock. But if not to knock on you, because I've been living under a rock, not knowing there were grouse where Bill's from in Northeast Iowa. Yeah. And we were talking before we hit record. There's a lot of cool symmetry to this podcast. In conversation. The first project Eric and I did 6 years ago was called the Bucks to Birds campaign. We kind of worked with Ruffed Grouse Society on it, more messaging than fundraising, trying to get deer hunters to invest and care about ruffed grouse the same way they do about whitetail deer, because deer hunters, you can make the argument, they're North America's greatest conservationists just by what they invest in the species financially, blood, sweat, and tears. But anyway, as part of that campaign and messaging, we did some fundraising and didn't raise a lot of money, but enough to donate some chainsaw equipment to Northeast Iowa, or to the Iowa DNR, to a wildlife technician in Northeast Iowa. Fast forward, I guess it's been 5 years ago. I've always watched your video content, Bill, back with Midwest Whitetail, and then especially with you and your daughter Jordan on your new farm. I've really, really enjoyed watching that stuff. But anyway, I can remember last year, maybe around this time, I sat down to eat lunch one day, and I was, clicking through YouTube, what video am I going to watch? And it popped up Bill Winke and Ruffed Grouse. And I tell you, I don't know if I've ever been so excited to see a ruffed grouse video. I watched it all the way through, and I was tickled for a lot of different reasons. Number one, to see somebody like yourself with your platform educating and advocating about ruffed grouse. That's what Eric and I do. The Gift for Grouse Initiative is to educate and advocate for the species where we are, Virginia, Ohio, mainly in Appalachia, but I mean, totally different part of the grouse's range, totally different part of the country, but a similar, I think there's a lot of parallels, declining habitat, declining population. So I was tickled to see you taking the time to advocate and educate to the masses about grouse in your area.
Yeah, and I think that video was fairly popular. I think quite a few people watched that. So that was good, because sometimes it's hard to get people fired up about a cause, so to speak, but this is more about the management of land, and how that coincides with other species other than white-tailed deer. And, my primary platform is white-tailed deer, obviously, and that's where most of my viewers are focused. But there's a surprising amount of support from our audience, considering, what else can we do here? I mean, what else is this land that I'm managing for whitetails? What else can it do? And ruffed grouse obviously is pretty high on that list in certain areas.
Yeah, it's really cool. We've, again, a lot of parallels, a lot of symmetry. Eric and I come from heavy deer backgrounds, and we never made a conscious, intentional decision to go down this grouse road. We'd put out some content or talk about grouse, and similar to your video, because I read through all the comments and people responded really, really well. And on a much smaller scale, that's what Eric and I experience as well. Whenever we're talking about the species or its habitat or what you can do for its habitat, whatever you can do to make a difference for the bird and its habitat, people have such an appetite for it, which is encouraging and motivating, because on one side of the coin, it seems like in a lot of places, ruffed grouse have kind of become the forgotten species. But when you by no fault of their own, people out of sight, out of mind, they kind of forget about them. But when, like your video, what we're doing, when it pops back up on their radar, they're like, oh yeah, I remember, so it's important that we keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Cause I've said it a few different times, is that if I could be an awesome ruffed grouse hunting farm versus an awesome whitetail hunting farm, I'd go the ruffed grouse route, because I can hunt whitetails all over the place. I mean, this was good rough grouse hunting when I was a kid. I mean, it was, maybe it rivaled some of the better areas where you're at. Probably not as good as some of the like Wisconsin and Minnesota, prime areas, but I mean, it was Iowa, and people don't think about rough grouse in Iowa, but we were talking earlier. I mean, it was typical on a day of grouse hunting to get upwards of 20 flushes, and our bag limit back then was 3, and it was pretty rare to actually kill 3. That was pretty tough, but you could get the flushes and the birds were here, and it was fun. I grew up doing that. I didn't hunt deer when I was a kid because there weren't any. We had grouse. Now it's just the opposite.
Crazy, right?
Hills now are full of deer, and there aren't any grouse. When I was a kid, they were full of grouse, and there weren't any deer. So it's just kind of interesting how it's reversed. So I've got grouse hunting in my early blood more so than even deer hunting.
That's I think, well, we'll get into that later on, but I think you can't convince me otherwise that there's not a correlation between deer numbers and grouse numbers, just in terms of deer impact on habitat, vegetation, all that goes along with it. But when would you say you started, or the community, the area, when did population start to drop off a little bit? Because I know out here people always point to it was good up until maybe the early 2000s, and then after that, it's almost like the bottom fell out. Is that similar to what you've experienced, or before or after?
I don't know, because after I went to college, and then my first job out of college was in Michigan, and I didn't grouse hunt after that. So that would have been 86 when I graduated from college, and up until then it was really good. And I talked to the regional, they call them private lands biologists here, And it was about, well, he was the guy that was on that episode that she watched. And he gave me the timeline of the decline. And I think it was starting around then, like the late 80s was sort of the peak time here. And it started rolling off after that. So it's been, more dormant for longer than what you've seen there.
Right. Is
And he was all about land use. And, I don't know. And because I can remember what things were like back then. And there was a lot of cattle in the woods. And there wasn't a lot of stem count. In certain areas there was. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just wrong. But there's just a million predators now. And there weren't a million predators when I was a kid. That was when all those herbicides and stuff, and there weren't any hawks and all the, it's like now every tree's got a hawk in it. Every tree's got a raccoon in it. And underneath every tree, there's a possum. It's like, how can anything that nests on the ground survive with that kind of pressure? And heck, we've got eagles nesting. 150, 200 yards from where I'm sitting right now, there's a nest with 2 baby eagles in it. And, everything here is designed to eat, what we're producing. It's just like a ecosystem on steroids because we provide it, everything moves in to take advantage of it. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but everybody says it's habitat, and I keep thinking, is it because they don't want us to have to admit the honest truth that it's really predators? But maybe it's not predators. What's you guys' take on that? I'm sure you're pretty close to the forefront of understanding what caused these declines.
I think, I we're wink, wink, smiling. I'm glad you said it. Because, I think, and I'll let Eric, certainly chime in, habitat for any species, grouse included, everybody preaches as the cure-all. And that's a great starting point, but let's not pretend that there are other factors at play. And Eric would be more familiar when raptors became, and I'm not advocating we go out and shoot them by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a correlation, as you just mentioned, Bill, between one and the other. Whenever raptors became federally protected, and again, I'm not telling people to go out and shoot them by any stretch of the imagination, but I would echo what you're saying, Bill, just that, the grouse, they need a very specific type of habitat, but as I'm learning, and again, out here is very different than where you are, but, you just mentioned that you've had grouse in woodland situations with cattle running through it with low stem count. I believe that entirely, just versus what I've seen out here, different set of circumstances. We should work to provide that young forest and that high stem density, but I've learned that grouse can do quite well. I think we need to broaden our horizon as to what ruffed grouse habitat looks like. And to circle back to the predators, I think they are harder on the species than what we are aware of or what we can certainly measure. There's some research out here. It's quite a bit old now. It's called the ACGRP, the Appalachian Cooperative Grouse Research Project, Bill. Eric was part of it, late 90s, early 2000s, Virginia, Ohio, Tennessee, North Carolina, the Appalachians. And the vast majority of grouse predation was avian, owls, Cooper's hawks, sharpshin. I forget what percentage, close to 50. So as you mentioned, it's anecdotal, but you talk to a lot of people. Back in the day, there were fewer raptors than there are now. Now there are fewer grouse, but we have more raptors. So I think there's a pretty direct correlation.
Well, the other thing I do think, though, is if you make it thick enough in the habitat, especially undergrowth, it makes it a lot tougher for the birds of prey, to get to the grouse. So, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a million raccoons running around now, and they like nothing more than to break up a nest. And there's and possums are the same, and I don't know how many other things out there are nest raiders. There's probably half the stuff on my farm is probably looking to freeload off a nest they can find on the ground somewhere. We do produce turkeys, so that we know we're getting some ground nesting birds through, but it's not the same as if there weren't any nest robbers. So I think that's a big part of it too, is just trying to figure out how do you motivate, how do you incentivize people to remove, the animals that are destroying the nests. And that, again, you could say, well, the hawks, they're going to take their share. But if we do make it thick enough, and we talk about habitat, and we will, I'm sure, that's going to protect at least a certain percentage of them from above. But how do we protect them from below too? I don't know. I don't get the whole correlation of these declines, because everybody seems to lump it into one thing, and they say, well, it's the habitat. Well, my habitat's really, really good. Where are the grouse? And there are other pockets here in northeast Iowa that have that early successional type habitat. There's a lot of people, not a lot, some people that are consistently burning and creating, these types of environments. Well, where are the grouse then? So why aren't they reacting to that? And maybe it's the weather patterns, who knows? But it's not so simple as just the habitat, I don't think. I think that's just the first grab that the biologist community, goes after. Because I don't think it's, like I said, I've just seen too many examples where we've created their perfect world, and we're still at 2 drumming grouse on this farm. And how come there's not, 8 now?
Right.
Yeah. I know when it comes to the trapping versus habitat, I know when we kind of addressed this years ago, Cody and I, and it became so tribal. It was like team habitat, team trapping, and I mean, it was ridiculous. The back and forth bickering that people are like, no, it's habitat. No, it's trapping. It's like, you're both correct. If you don't have lots of land and you're passionate about something, pick up steel. If you have property to do something, do some habitat, if you're, you do what you can with what you have, right? As long as you are doing something, is how we solve problems, just keep moving forward. You brought up a very good point in reference to the trapping. It's like, we are at an age, and let's call a spade a spade. We are at a time period where trapping is, very taboo. Prices are down. The trapping populace is, 60, 70, 80 years old, the demographic of that. Let's call it what it is. So, and they're just doing out of passion. So I know myself, I'm 52. I got coons in my bird feeder almost every night, and I'm too lazy to go out there and put some steel down. I'd rather sit there and complain about it, right? I mean, it is. So it's that. So people, and in the deer hunting community, there's all these factors. It's like you have this super race of raccoons now because of baiting and all this stuff. I mean, these raccoons are healthy. I mean, you have state agencies dropping rabies vaccines from planes. There's no more distemper. There's no more of this. It's a generality. It's, I'm being dramatic, but we're producing healthier predators to a certain degree. They're not dying as much as they used to be. But without a doubt, the predator situations, and I'm in Ohio, Bill, and the turkey population, it's just, we went from, high 20s to barely making 15,000 birds a year. And, bear with me on this. I try not to be long-winded, but when I released so many birds working for a state agency that it was unbelievable. I mean, we were trapping and relocating birds all over in Ohio. And they did, it was insane, the results of it. You would drive down and see a flock of 200. You would see a flock of 300. And you never thought that would ever go away. And then all of a sudden, you know what? I think the predators finally realized that, hey, it took them a while to realize, there's eggs. They never experienced anything like this. So the population was going up and climbing. And then the predators finally realized, hey, there's an opportunity here. Mm-hmm. So now we're consistently around 15,000 birds per year. And we might have peaks and we might have downs, but based on cicada hatches, we have to wait for a cicada hatch for predators to be too full in the tummy to have poult production high, grouse production high. I mean, that tells you right there that it is a predator problem. It's not a habitat problem. But
Right.
every 17 years, we got to wait for that to happen, so
Well,
that just shows you that. So yeah,
it,
the ebbs and flows of it all.
and I think they've liberalized the laws in Iowa here with respect to raccoons, and I mean there's no laws anymore. I mean, you can kill them with whatever you want to, whenever you want to, however
Mm-hmm.
you want to, just kill them. And so, more people are paying attention to it because, like you said, our raccoons look like little black bears. I mean, they're just roly
Yeah.
poly, great big giant things because, for one thing, I'm planting food plots for the deer, and the raccoons love that. And, everything that we do makes the ecosystem healthier for everything that lives there. Well,
Mm-hmm.
except unfortunately the ruffed grouse, and maybe to a lesser extent some of the other ground nesting birds like the turkey. But so anyway, what I'm coming back to is uh, we could set out, and I bought 36 of those foothold
Mm-hmm.
raccoon traps. So I'm going to get ambitious here pretty soon and get all those out. And I bet you I could fill those things almost every single night.
Oh, yeah.
36 of them. And probably for a
Yeah.
week, I could probably take a couple hundred of them off here without even scraping the surface. And
Mm-hmm.
like how many nests? It's almost like like a net that runs through the property and just gleans out anything that's possibly consumable. Like I planted chestnuts on the farm from nut. I thought, oh, this is really cool. I did it 2 years in a row. Well, the raccoons found them within a day. They found them all, like buried in the ground, dug every single one of them up and ate them. I planted hundreds of them, each year. Well, so if they're that good at finding what's edible, how tough is it going to be for a nest somewhere on the ground to escape this whole scourge of raccoon?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big deal, and maybe it's worse even than what we talked about with the hawks and birds of prey. I bet you if there were no raccoons, I bet you we'd see a lot more turkeys and ruffed grouse.
Yeah, and I think what we heard, Bill, is Cody wants to bring back DDT on the landscape. That's at least that's what I heard. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. It's like during my boyhood, there were so many things that just killed everything out there except the birds, and yeah, it was pretty.
Yeah,
It was a different time.
yeah, there's just so many factors when it comes into nest predation and nest success and stuff, and we're finding out once you get over that hump of successful nesting, it's the next step is actually the biggest step over the nesting production, and that's brooding habitat. You got to have places for these things, and that's like with the turkeys. I mean, that's the same thing. I'm sure it's the same, obviously, with the ruffed grouse. Once you get over that hurdle, what's the next step? We got to get them to at least where they can fly, and that's hard to come by anymore. People love to get on their tractors and aesthetically please their eyes. The old field environments, early successional, etc. It's stuff that you already know. I'm not preaching. I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah, it's just it's a tough woe go for many species.
I think, and it's the thing that we talked about on that video that I produced, and that is the crossover between creating prime deer habitat and creating prime grouse habitat, and how they are basically the same. There's a few things that here at least we can do, by coppicing some of the aspen trees and stuff like that, to promote a whole bunch of aspens, coming back in. And other than that, everything we're doing for the deer is exactly the same thing that we'd be doing for the ruffed grouse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like with so many people out there, focusing on deer management in some of these ruffed grouse states, there has to be a missing piece of this puzzle, and how is it that maybe they aren't doing the right things? Maybe that's part of it, because I do a fair amount of consulting where I go around and I look at people's properties and walk them through some of the steps that they need to take in order to make it better for deer. And rarely, very, very rarely, do I ever find places where they've taken the habitat far enough. And so I think people, they see deer management as passing up young bucks. And that's kind of like, I'm a deer manager. Well, really what you are is a trophy hunter. That's all. You're not really a deer manager. And because the management really comes back more to the whole, environment that you're creating for the deer. It's not just which ones you shoot and which ones you don't shoot. It's like how healthy can you make the environment that they live in for the deer? Well, most people don't do that. So maybe it is worthwhile to tell the deer hunters that they just need to be a little bit better at their game, because that will certainly, help the grouse. And what do you guys see from the standpoint of habitat? I mean, do you see obviously we know there's crossovers, but do you see places where they diverge, where deer habitat and ruffed grouse habitat diverge, and they're not the same thing?
Cody, and I'll let him speak here, but real quick is if they were just migratory, I mean, I think enough deer guys have done enough on the landscape to sustain a population, if there was a population that they can tweak. But right. What you're seeing is that there's woodcock there, which is an indicator species that you're there, like you have it. It's just they're not there. We missed I think we missed that window of getting people on board with QDM or deer management.
When they were still grouse.
Yeah. But Cody, he coined a term, and we kind of jokingly use it all the time, and I'll let him take it from there. Is these goggles things, But
I don't know how we got started on it, but when you're walking your woods or you're walking a piece of property, you said it, Bill. I mean, there's enormous crossover. I mean, maybe old field management, warm season grasses where there's some separation, and depending on where you're at in the country, but if you got grouse and you got deer, there's 80% of it is one applies to the other. But we call them grouse goggles, and when you're walking your woods or you're walking your piece of property, and the majority of us, and not to knock anybody, I used to do it this way, as do most land managers. You're looking at your property through the lens of a deer. What do deer eat this? Is this good deer cover? Is it good deer food? Can I hunt deer in this type of habitat, whatever the case may be? But when you look at that environment through grouse goggles, as we call them, it just opens an entirely new world, and you learn different plants, you learn different shrubs, and you become a better land manager. And I think it just opens your eyes to an entirely new world, because when you see how a deer navigates a piece of property, and just for argument's sake, a deer's home range is a square mile, 640 acres. A ruffed grouse's home range is anywhere from maybe 10 to 20 up to 200, but significantly smaller.
Square miles?
Acres.
Okay.
Also, I might have misspoke. 640 acres, a square mile.
Cody's still stuck on a DDT.
Yeah, maybe I've been spraying herbicide, so maybe I have absorbed it and it's migrated to my brain. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Bill, you mentioned in your consulting that a lot of landowners, they don't go far enough with the deer management. Is that just because one thing Eric and I have discussed is true deer management, and you kind of touched on it. Very few people in this day and age practice true deer management in terms of managing their timber, shooting the right amount of deer or does. Is it, or when you're talking about not seeing people go far enough, are they not managing their forests enough? Are they not cutting enough timber? Is it just that trophy deer mindset where it's just food plots and passing young bucks? If you could push them a little bit further to go as far as you'd like them to see, what would that look like?
Well, it's almost always the same. I mean, there's my role is really more how to get them to the common endpoint. Almost everywhere I go, they all lack proper cover, and they have generally too many deer. And that's, rarely do I go to a location, and you got to figure most of the people that are hiring me are pretty serious deer hunters. So they probably have some land, and that land is probably in a good area. They probably bought that, on purpose because there was a lot of deer in that area, and maybe they got some good neighbors or whatever the case may be. But I'd say 90% of my consulting visits come back to how do you fix these two things, the habitat and the overpopulation. And they're a little bit hand in hand, obviously, because it's hard to fix the habitat if you have too many deer. So you sort of have to, work those from the sides back to the middle. but it's like I said, very rare that I ever walk onto a property and go, wow, this looks really good. Um, it's either multiflora row, not multiflora rows. I mean, some of it sometimes, but a lot of times you'll run into like bush honeysuckle, like a farm that's just consumed with it, and they're like, well, what do you think? And I say, well, we can't do any habitat work here until you clean this place up, because anything we do is just going to promote more bush honeysuckle, and it's so there's nothing growing on the ground, and you just run into situations like that, and you say, okay, you've got a choice to make here. You either have to take the hard medicine and make the big change on this property, or in my opinion, just sell it to somebody who doesn't know what bush honeysuckle is, and go buy a different farm somewhere else, where you got a chance to actually do some habitat work. But like I said, rarely do they have great habitat. Very, very rarely. And that's one thing that I'd say universally that I see, which these are the people who are serious about it. So if the serious people don't have good habitat, then the average guy is just, all he's doing is planting food plots and passing small bucks, and calling it deer management. And, it's just, I call it either trophy hunting or deer hunting. It's not deer management.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to come up with an acronym of what this is anymore. QDM, the philosophy got robbed, and it's unrecognizable, but that's a topic for another day. But yeah, it's hard to, I mean, what are you seeing, especially, who you are and the people that follow you and stuff like that? I know, I'm a deer consultant and stuff as well. It's just when you talk about herd management, they just don't want it. It just stops.
Well, they have to understand why it's bad, and the illustration that I use is the bullseye. So if you take a target, in the center of it is your high deer concentration area, your mature bucks are going to be out in rings 2 and 3, so they're not going to be in that high concentration area. And it's just been lots of research done on that, and not only that, but my own experiences on lots of different properties that I've owned and managed myself. And the bucks, mature bucks especially, fringe out from high concentration areas. So yeah, maybe during the rut you get some of them swing back through again, but that's not really the way to produce and sustain high quality hunting for mature bucks. You need to have a low enough density that you become at least neutral. And what I found in southern Iowa on that farm I owned down there, which was a lot of fun, that was quite an experiment. I became a net importer of bucks. So all the farms around me, or especially when you go far enough away, I created the vacuum. So I took the bullseye and reversed it. So my bullseye, instead of being red, was black. So it became the black hole. It was sucking the bucks in out of those higher concentration areas around me. So I had a super high buck to doe ratio. I had way more bucks than does. So if you can explain that to them so they understand it, then they see the significance or the relevance of why they need to be shooting enough does in order that they're not that middle of the bullseye. They're not that high concentration area where all the mature bucks are fringing out away from. I didn't experience the same phenomena that most people do when they say, oh man, I see these great bucks, then I never see them again, or they just don't live here. That farm down there where we killed as many does as we possibly could, we saw those bucks consistently, and they were very huntable. They didn't leave during the rut, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the point is I can go through all of those experiences and I can explain to them why they need to be shooting does, at least enough to balance things out and get the population down to where they're not the hot spot. They want their neighbors far enough down the road. They don't even want their direct neighbors to be the hot spot because it's going to flow too much into them. You want somebody 2 miles away to be exporting their bucks to you. You don't want to be exporting your bucks out.
Yeah.
So that's
Go on. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that's kind of what gets them sort of over the hump when it comes to deer density.
Yeah, because I know I preach, Cody, as well, herd management, and in Ohio, and I'm going to butcher these numbers, but we call it the 1% club. where people that practice QDM only still 1% kill more than 2 deer when they can kill up to 3 to 6, depends on the situation where you are, and they still want the same results. But swinging it back to our conversation with grouse, and actually all the forest ecology of it, deer, I mean, it is affecting, you can't debate that, affecting ecosystems. I mean, Pennsylvania, bless you, Pennsylvania, they have, like Allegheny National Forest in many areas, they have those high fence areas, and it's night and day difference. And in Virginia, it's just a broken record how much they are damaging our ecosystems and stuff like that for woodland creatures and etc.
Well, not only that, but for themselves, because they're going to eat all the preferred browse until it doesn't exist anymore, which means it's not going to exist because there's nothing there, to come back from. So, and that's the one thing I'd say about this farm is it's just solid food. And I don't want a ton of deer, because as soon as you have a ton of deer, like some of the properties that I had down in southern Iowa that I either owned or managed or was, part owner of or whatever, I mean, there was no browse. I mean, the deer just invaded the fields every evening because that's where the food was. Well, here, they're harder to kill because they don't come out, because all the food is in the timber. Not all the food, but they would rather browse their way through the timber because it's all there. Everything they want is in the timber. So that makes them a little bit harder to hunt because they don't make themselves vulnerable by coming to you. You've got to go to them. But the point being, that's the healthiest for them. I mean, you want them to pick what's best for them at any given time. So they're going to know. They can say, well, I just took a picture this morning of, I think it wasn't even water hemp. I don't even know what the weed was, but it was out in the middle of a soybean plot, and the beans are like 10 inches, 12 inches tall. And there's this plant that the deer have just devoured, and the beans all around it they haven't even touched. So, that's because they know what's best for them, or at least what's most palatable, or whatever it is that they key on at that time. And it's not necessarily the stuff that we plant. We think, oh, we've got plenty of alfalfa and corn and beans, we should be fine. Well, that's like the hamburgers and French fries or whatever. You got to have other foods in your diet, and the deer benefit from that variety and having that browse. So, if you got too many deer, you don't have that anymore, or you've done such a poor job of managing the canopy that nothing's growing. So there's nothing there on the ground level for the deer to eat, and they just wipe everything out. So again, it comes back. I mean, obviously we're not doing a deer hunting or deer habitat podcast, but the habitat that the deer wipe out because they like whatever it is that's growing there, and they eat, all of that. All that's left is the junk. We give gooseberry, multiflora rose, bush honeysuckle, a few other things, prickly ash, in this area. You don't have anything that they like. It's not like you're creating a smorgasbord with a lot of variety. And I think that's the same issues that you probably run into with grouse habitat too, is because, when you wipe out 75% of the species that deer eat, it's probably, a lot of stuff that grouse would benefit from too.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's I'd say a for sure weakness on my discussion of grouse habitat is, I come at this from a deer hunting standpoint, and I know what the deer want and what they eat, and I know that how aggressively they can wipe stuff out. So I don't know if they're eating the stuff that grouse would otherwise benefit from or not, but I'm assuming so.
I think they do. I mean, I think there's a pretty direct correlation just between deer numbers and I don't know about a correlation between deer numbers and grouse numbers. That's not to say if you bring deer down, you're going to see grouse go up. I don't think it's that direct of a correlation. But on the other side of the coin, deer, we talk about it. Deer are generalist species, and it's hard for any of us, even the three of us who know deer, know their habitats, and are so in tune with what they eat and how they go about their day doing deer things. It's so hard for us to imagine what a single deer eats every single day. And those, multiflora, bush honeysuckle, down here we have a lot of autumn olive. deer, being a generalist species, that's not prime habitat for them, but they can exist in that habitat. Grouse, being a more specialist species, they need native habitat, native vegetation. If you ask a grouse to live in a monoculture of an invasive species, then they're not going to last very long. While a deer can, a grouse can't. So all that to say, Bill, you said it, and I've heard you say it in your videos, that deer, they can so negatively impact native vegetation that they'll eat it until it's gone, and then once it's gone, deer can exist just fine. But once that native habitat is gone and is replaced with invasive species or less desirable native habitat, I think grouse can do better in that less, quote unquote, less desirable. I shouldn't say less desirable, but like spice bush. We have spice bush down here. Deer don't eat spice bush, which I'm thankful for, but grouse love spice bush. It's a native shrub. Real stemmy, thicket forming, produces a soft mass berry late summer. That's fantastic for grouse. But in situations where deer are eating every leaf and every stem of native habitat that comes up, then grouse aren't going to be left with anything. And I think you see that a lot. Eric mentioned those exclusion cages. They do that a lot in PA, and don't discredit yourself, Bill. You said you're coming at it from a deer hunting standpoint. I get in the ear with a lot of foresters just to get their impact, or their opinion on deer impact on not so much grouse, but just on forest management. Because I always say, how we manage our forests are how we manage our wildlife, especially here in Appalachia, but certainly where you are in bluff country as well. But how we manage our deer is how we manage our forests as well. And those exclusion cages, it's remarkable to see the response in hardwood regeneration, native habitat, and the exclusion versus out. I was with a forester yesterday, and he showed me some photos from a cut that he was evaluating, and it was, just a clear image. I think it was a yellow poplar that was cut down, and around the stump where, a sudden shock of sunlight was all Japanese stilt grass. And you see that and you're like, well, there's nothing good here. There's nothing growing. You only see what you see. But within the top where the tree, in the top where deer couldn't get to it was all elderberry, blackberry, and I think there were some oaks shooting up. So I don't know. We talk a lot about deer. I hate to vilify deer hunters and the deer, and certainly don't want to vilify the animal. It's just, it's a talking point that we've tried to drive home a lot. And it's, not so much deer management, but forest management. And to have a healthy forest, you just got to have healthy populations of deer.
Well, and it's a balance that most people don't understand. It's taken me my whole life to see past like multiple opportunities. Like, oh man, when I go deer hunting, I want to see deer. I want to see 15. I want to see 20. I want to see $5 every time I sit in my tree. It takes a lot of years before that isn't the goal. And I don't know for sure. This comes off probably as seeming like, oh, that's not beneficial to this conversation, but I don't know that I'm being rewarded by the deer for all the work that I'm doing to make the place better. And I think maybe it's just going to take more time, but we've been going for 5 years now on this farm. This will be the 5th year, and the habitat's been a priority the whole time, and the population's been fairly low. So I've been able to create some really good habitat, just unbelievable. You'd go through there and you'd say, man, oh man, every deer in here is the healthiest possible deer that I can imagine, and they are. You see them come out in the food plots when they do come out, which is fairly rare, and they're just like tanks. They're just in great shape, but we're just not seeing like that jump in antler quality that all the biologists say, well, if you feed the deer exactly what the deer wants, you create the perfect world for this deer to live in, you're going to get rewarded. Mm-hmm. We're getting rewarded with healthy deer. We're not getting rewarded with big antlers. Mm-hmm. So that's been, I won't say it's not frustrating, but I thought I was going to see, the deer come back and say, hey, Bill, you've been doing all this work for us. Look what we're going to produce on top of our heads for you. But that's not necessarily the one for one that I'm seeing. I'm seeing the bigger bodies overall, very healthy deer. but not necessarily bigger antlers, which I find interesting. And it's been, because you want to say, I'm dangling this carrot in front of the deer manager to say, okay, if you do your habitat work right, you can expect a 10% or 20% jump in your antler score, because most guys are focused on that. And I haven't been able to get that carrot to dangle in front of people just yet. So it's when they ask me what have you seen, I'm gonna say, well, it hasn't been quite as positive as what I hoped. I mean, the deer are awesome. I mean, you'll never see fatter deer, bigger bodied. They're beautiful. There's no signs of any stress whatsoever. Like the southern Iowa deer, they all had patches of hair missing and ticks all over the place. And granted, there was a lot of ticks down there, but these deer are just slick. I mean, they're perfect. And then you think, well, why aren't they growing big antlers then? How come they're averaging 140 inches? Why aren't they averaging 155 or 160? Like they should, like they even did in that southern Iowa farm with tons of deer. Now that I got my density down, my habitat's awesome. How come the bucks aren't bigger? Well, that's it. Maybe it's a cycle that we have to run through. Maybe it's a genetic thing. I don't know, but I would have a lot easier time pushing the habitat agenda on people if I had some little bit stronger anecdotal evidence on my own farm for all the work that we've done.
Are you a stamp where you're at, where people are harvesting deer? Like, meaning, is it around you high deer populations, or are you just the only one?
No, we're not even high deer population here. Yeah. There's overall, I'd say we're probably the highest in this area. Excuse me. It's mostly cattle country around me. So we're a little bit of an island. I mean, there's some hunting pressure around me, but not a ton, because there's not so many deer and so many big deer that it attracts attention. It's just one of those things. It's like, these are really healthy deer. You're not going to wake people up in the middle of the night to go hunt healthy deer. They want to hunt deer with big antlers. So anyway, so we're not really like drawing a lot of attention to this neighborhood, because we just aren't producing those, super high quality deer from the antler standpoint. So I don't think it's hunting pressure either. It's just I think it's just genetics or something weird.
I got some really good year and a half. So you just name a price and we can fix some shipments. You meet me halfway. We can just do middle of the night.
Trade some deer for some grouse.
I'd say, it might change on its own.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
I know I've had a lot of experience over the years with genetics, and there's a lot of different positions on that. And if you really want to change the genetics, you have to shoot almost every deer, and sort of hit the reset button. And which means, because the does carry a high percentage of what the bucks put on their head, and you don't know which doe is producing great bucks and which ones aren't. So you just almost have to say, well, they all aren't, because my genetics aren't that great. Let's just hit reset and get rid of all the does and start over, So it's just anyway, we got off topic. I'm sorry, but
no. Yeah, it was swing it back. Speaking of your state, what's the DNR? Have they been positive, like they recognize what's going on with the ruffed grouse, and especially in your area? Because granted, Cody mentioned to you, we did that fundraiser for those guys, and they were so appreciative of what we did, as little as it was or whatever. But yeah, what is the response between with the DNR? And as well as the neighborhood or the community? Is there talk in Iowa about ruffed grouse?
Not much. No, I mean, I'd say the DNR more so than the average, public, because it's been so long since there was a huntable number that people have forgotten about grouse, forgotten about them. So I would say if you took the deer away, they'd panic, and if you took the turkeys away, they'd sort of panic. But when the grouse disappeared, nobody really panicked. Or so maybe it happened so slowly, and there weren't that many people that were serious about it. There was just a handful of really serious grouse hunters, because I don't know, people didn't hunt them. But so it wasn't baked into our culture, as much as say deer and to a much lesser extent turkey. So it's not like a conversation starter in this area. People just look at you funny, like, ruffed grouse. Did we ever have those? But the DNR really does have it as one of their priorities. I think they are taking it very seriously. In fact, Brian Sowers was a fellow I was hoping to kind of get on this with us that is a private lands biologist in this part of Iowa, and he just had a workshop where he invited people in, and they went through some of the steps that they could take. And I haven't had a chance to visit with him since then. I missed it because I was in the process of doing all these projects on the property here, but they do see that, and they have programs in place like funding for ruffed grouse habitat. I'm sure it's all habitat driven. But I've gotten into a lot of habitat projects already through the state that are just general habitat projects. They're not like specific to a species. So, I mean, I think they are taking it fairly seriously. I know some of them, it's kind of like their pet project. We need grouse. We need grouse. They see an aspen tree and they just want to get their chainsaw out and cut it down. I mean, because that's how you get like a million little aspen trees.
Yeah.
They can't even drive down the road without saying, "Oh man, we need to cut that tree down."
Yeah.
So there are some guys that are really focused on it still, but the average person that has a shotgun that doesn't even think about grouse.
Yeah, I know you do a lot. You certainly do a lot of projects on your farm bill, and you said farm bill. Play on words.
Yeah,
farm bill.
That's coming up.
You said this is your 6th year on the farm, 5th or 6th?
I think 5th. Yes.
Okay,
5th.
so we're maybe a multi-part question. Were there grouse there when you bought it that you know of?
Yes.
And could you talk a little bit about the projects that you're doing, and then it's it's not grouse focused, but the habitat projects that you're doing, and have grouse responded to those projects? I know you cut a bunch, I know you burn a bunch, and then are there more now than when you first bought it, or best to your knowledge, are numbers about the same? What are you seeing from when you first bought the farm to where you are now with the work that you've done?
I think it's about the same. I think there's a couple drumming grouse here every spring. Maybe there's 3. We've got 600 and some acres, and maybe there's a few more than that because I don't get around the whole property. But the birds might move around a little bit too. You might hear one on this ridge one day, and on the next ridge the next day, and you count it as 2 birds. But there's some here. There's still drumming grouse on this property, and the DNR, they even bring listening boxes or whatever they call them.
ARUs, yeah.
Yeah, and they'll set them out, on this farm and just listening for drumming, just trying to get some kind of a census or a count. It's one of those areas where there still are some, and there's parts of Almaquee County, which is the corner of Iowa that I live in, where there aren't any grouse anymore. Like they're gone. But at least this little area still has some. So the question is, how do you move that number? So I keep thinking that what we're doing, we should say, okay, now we went from 2 last year to, 4 2 years later or whatever. And maybe it just takes longer. Maybe that cycle takes longer. Maybe it's more dependent on things other than just habitat, like we've talked. Maybe there's the predator management. Maybe there's weather cycles. Maybe, a dry spring is beneficial and we haven't had enough of them, or whatever the case may be. There might be secondary, factors that beyond just the habitat, because I wouldn't say that based on all the work that we've done, we've seen a great response from that. But it may take time. And I kept telling the guys from the DNR, hey, I'm doing the hard part. I'm buying the land and doing all this work. You guys need to do 2 things: find me the money, to keep these projects going, and go get some grouse and bring them in here and let them loose. Let's see if we can, repopulate this farm. Because if we don't have the nucleus here, like that critical mass, or like, not fill it, but, replenish, then can you find some grouse and bring them here? So, I mean, they don't necessarily have budgets for that stuff. So, just because, I think it's a great idea doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, it's tough to manage for grouse. I mean, as much as we love to do it, I hope people, Eric and I say it a lot, and you kind of said it, just because you do the work, you're not we say it all the time, with deer, to circle back to them for just a brief second. You do any type of disturbance, any type of deer management, they respond immediately. And if you're doing grouse specific management, or grouse are your focus, you just have to rewire your brain to understand that when you do that management, they're not going to respond immediately. And that response, if and when it is positive, is going to happen very gradually. Like you said, a lot of the factors are just beyond our control. I think warm, dry springs are a big part of it, just to help those broods. Because we've had, and this is anecdotal, but we had our upland bird biologist on back during the winter, and he kind of confirmed in so many words that this is happening. We've had, I think, the last 3 springs have been pretty warm and dry, and we've seen a slight uptick they've seen a slight uptick in their population surveys during the spring. So that's part of it. Here in Appalachia, a big influencing factor is hard mass, because we're such oak hickory dominated forest ecosystem. So when we've had pretty good hard acorn crops the last several years, I think that's part of it. We can control none of those things. We can't control when oaks drop acorns or what the weather's going to do during the spring. But you kind of mentioned it. You're doing all this work, and I hope people understand. Eric and I talk about this a lot. Just because you're doing the work and grouse don't respond right away, that isn't a failure. By no means should you get discouraged by that. Create the habitat and the environment for them, and when stars align and conditions are right, I think they'll move in, and that response will be gradual. You won't go from 4 drummers this year to 10 the next year. It's going to happen incrementally. But grouse management, I talk about it a lot. I think maybe not grouse management, but forest management, or managing for a species like grouse. It's kind of the essence of stewardship, because it's really selfless work. You just kind of got to do the work and for the right reasons, and then just trust that nature's going to reward you with grouse on the landscape.
You do it because it's the right road.
Right, exactly.
And you don't do it necessarily expecting, or you're hoping, but you're not expecting an immediate return. Mm-hmm. And I've certainly seen that with the deer. And, when I go on consulting trips, it's not the advice that people want to hear. They want to hear, oh, if you do this, then this. But some places it's like that. Sometimes you do get a 1-to-1. It's like, you can make a huge difference by improving these 3 things, but sometimes it's just a long-term, fix. Like you said, it's like you create the perfect world, and eventually you get rewarded for that. Do you get rewarded for it right away? This is, no. Not usually. And it's unfortunate, because that's the world we live in. We think, if this, then that. Mm-hmm. We're going to see that return. And, the land management was different. And everybody talks about, what it was like. And I keep going back to my boyhood, and, people were motivated to manage land differently because that was the economy of their primary crop, which is either cattle or whatever it was. They did things differently, not because it benefited the birds. The birds were a secondary beneficiary of it. They were doing it because that's what, made their property useful to them. Well, those same land use practices aren't there now. So now people have to be more intentional in some of those things. And, my local biologist said, the farmers used to burn all the time. They just, because they wanted all the multiflora rose out of there, because it was, invading their pasture or whatever. It's like, well, nobody burns now. I burn, and I don't know probably 3 other people in this whole part of the state that burn, that burn timber. And people burn, grassland. Everybody burns, CRP, but almost nobody burns in the timber. So it's, maybe it's just something is just like, the economics of land ownership was different. That created a different management style that just happened to benefit the grouse. And now we're looking at it saying, well, whatever that was, we need to recreate it and be more intentional than just, fortunate or, a secondary. It needs to become a focus. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a strange, like I said, I don't like it when stuff doesn't work out like it's supposed to. Like And it's like, okay, I did this. Now, how come this didn't happen? It's
Right.
like, I want to see these grouse. I mean, we've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, blood,
Mm-hmm.
sweat, sometimes tears, cutting some of these trees down and creating these areas and burning them and doing all this stuff. It's like, where are these birds? Um,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's the frustration. And again, I think it's an important point, that you guys are touching on is it's not all, happy roses and, flowers and, life is great. And it's more like you do it because it's what you're supposed to do, and long term is where the reward comes, in theory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like with your place, you might not have the grouse, and Cody touched on it a little bit ago. There is something there on your property. Take this the right way, because I don't know how else to word it. You're not seeing it because you don't have the right pair of goggles on, right? So there's something that's being there that from all your hard work, it's just not the ruffed grouse. But the thing I wanted to, not to make you feel awkward or anything, that
It's
Cody
okay
and
if
I
he does,
get
Bill.
it.
He makes me feel awkward all the
I
time.
feel I make
So you're
it's what
officially
I
a
do
part of the
best,
team.
Bill. It's what I do. It's what I do best. No, it's when Cody rudely interrupted me. Yeah, it's we need people like you that have that voice, that influence to keep this conversation, because there wasn't a conversation, and the Ruffed Grouse Society can only do so much, and that's why like our platform is growing, because we're speaking about things that maybe they are not, and to have someone like you on means so much to Cody and I, because your listeners get to hear about forest management. We haven't touched a lot on that, like fire. It's good to burn in the woods. It's good to cut, even though that generation, they might never have see a grouse ever in their life, or have any connection with that bird. But when they hear controlled burning in your woods, or they see a log truck, there is no negative tone in their thought or their tongue. So the more we talk about it, it's a marathon, right? It's not a race when it comes to ruffed grouse or forest ecology. Grouse, Cody and I talk about it all the time. Grouse is just driving the truck. It's everything else bringing our forest back. And the more we talk about it and have people like you who are influential, that's the awkward part. Sorry, but it's just speaking about that stuff. It helps Ruffed Grouse Society. It helps Cody and I, and it does help move that needle in the right direction. When people see that stuff, logging trucks leave Bill's place or somebody else's place that they look up to, they watch on YouTube. That is such a powerful thing.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we really lock in on. We love Jordan and I both. We love all the habitat projects. We like seeing the change to the land, and we kind of like, under our breath, we curse the deer. It's like, oh, these stinking deer. We planted this apple tree, and look what they did to it. Or we planted these willow trees down through here, and look, they thrashed them and ruined them. I wish we didn't have any deer. It's almost like the land management becomes more the end goal than the species specific benefit. And I think that's probably where people ultimately will end up. Like if they do this long enough, they become stewards, not consumers. And then that's the whole key to it. Stewardship is that final step in the progression, and that's what we try to focus on, is stewardship. And so I think if you can push that word, people then say, hey, I want to be a steward. How do I become a steward? That sounds cool. So then I think that becomes almost like maybe not the end thing, but it's kind of cool to be a steward.
Yeah.
And not just a consumer, where all of a sudden people understand the difference. And we see ourselves now as stewards less than consumers, because we certainly aren't very good consumers. Sometimes we don't shoot near as many of the deer that we're after as what we should, but we become really good at growing things and changing the environment, and the stewardship part of it is really our focus. And that's fun. And we gain a lot of satisfaction from that. And I don't know, I guess you reach a certain point in your life where the stewardship becomes the destination. Whereas, for so many years, like how many 150, 60, whatever inch deer have you shot at, whatever. Now it's more of the conversation is what we're having now, because that's more interesting ultimately. That I don't know. And so I guess if anything that comes out of it, what we try to really get people locked in on is stewardship. And I think that's the whole Ruffed Grouse story too, because you can't call yourself a consumer if you're not getting that one for one return. If you say, well, I just planted this food plot and I don't see any deer. Well, that's the consumer's mindset. The steward's mindset is, let's create this environment, and eventually, the things that are supposed to happen are going to happen. So maybe that's the lesson, is we need to coin that term and make it a little bit more of a positive thing to be a steward.
Making stewardship cool again. We talked about it. Well, I love everything you said, and it kind of goes back to the grouse goggles. Eric and I have talked a lot about this before, and this is by no means, again, I hope people don't think we're knocking the deer hunters, but if how you manage or how you measure your management success is just by deer, whether that's like, kind of what you're struggling with, bigger antlers, or if it's trying to kill the biggest buck or the oldest buck, if deer is the metric by which you measure your management success, you're selling yourself awfully short. And, deer season is really short to begin with. And I mean, you can manage for deer all year round, but you're limiting yourself. And if deer are your, how you measure everything, you're putting a ceiling on yourself as a land manager. And, going back to those grouse goggles, I try to find as many little wins throughout the year when I measure, when I'm managing my property, as to how I can measure its success. And a grouse drumming might be one. I saw a hen and chicks last year. That was a huge win. I heard bobwhite quail Eric and I both heard bobwhite quail for the first time 2 years ago in 25 years, seeing a new plant species, or, getting oak regeneration beyond what a deer can eat. There's throughout the calendar year, and I say grouse goggles, it doesn't even have to be specific to grouse, but more stewardship. I'm trying to think of an alliteration with stewardship. I got nothing. But, with that stewardship lens, there's so many cool things happening on your property that if you open your eyes to it and look for those little details, there's wins all throughout the year that, for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, if they kind of adopt this mindset, you see whether it's a drum and grouse or a turkey hen and a bunch of poults, one of those wins just serves as catalyst to do more work and inspiration for the next little win like through that. Then, come deer season and it's time to kill a bunch of deer, kill a big buck, that's just icing on the cake. So that just goes back to rewiring our brains to adopting that stewardship mindset. And that can be for grouse, or that could be woodcock, or, whatever specialist species you got in your neck of the woods. Look for those little wins, and deer are just icing on the cake.
Yep. It's kind of always said the poorest person, when it comes to conservation, thinks that all they have is deer. And management, it's more than just that. Cody and I always kind of talked about, if you want to be a better deer manager, you learn about a bluebird, because you're micromanaging your warm season grasses, your old field type habitats, right? Learn about the species that really dictate what that habitat represents. You learn about that, then you can just pull the full potential of an old field out, especially warm season grasses, forests, etc. It's not about deer, when you micro scale it down there like that. But yeah, I don't know how much time you had, Bill.
You mentioned the land use bill. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just when we hit a stopping point, we'll know. I have things I can do, obviously. Everybody does. It's not like I'm going to sit here all day. But as soon as we get to a point where it was
1978. That was
let's go back to my junior high grouse hunting experiences.
One thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, Bill, is you mentioned the land use and the birds kind of being an unintentional beneficiary of that. And we're at the stage now where we have to be more intentional in how we manage our forests, more or less, just because, keeping it grouse focused, they're a young forest species. What, to the best of your ability, what's the best way for a private landowner to manage their forest in Northeast Iowa? And what I'd like to get your thoughts on, again, best that you can share, is if you got some ground and it needs cut, is there a market for, to move timber, to cut wood? Or the private landowners, do they cut a lot of wood, or is there a logging presence where you're at to get that work done?
Well, yeah, but this is where the private lands biologist that came and spoke with me last year, that this is where he said the problem came, like where we converged from a path of creating grouse habitat to a path of not, creating grouse habitat, and that's the way the timber's harvested. And see, the farmers back in the day, they just thought, well, trees are just a commodity. Let's cut them down and sell them. Let's keep this moving. Mm-hmm. Well, now nobody wants anything but walnut, and there's a fair amount of it in this area. So, or they might want the prime, veneer grade white oak or something like that. They don't want to just cut a giant hackberry tree and take it off to a pallet mill. That clear cutting mindset of saying, well, we're going to take anything marketable off this hill. They only take a few of the better trees, and it's the whole high grading mindset, and that's what he said has been sort of the beginning of the end, because now you end up with this over mature stand of junk timber, basically, and you don't get that sunlight to the ground. And farmers, they used to say, well, I want the sunlight because I get grass coming back, and my cows can eat all that brush that comes up. They're not going to eat that 75-foot tall oak tree. Let's cut this stuff down. Let's open it up. Well, those decisions have changed. So as a result of that, the habitat has changed too. And so that's what I was saying. Some of the local economics of what drove, farming 30 years ago have changed. Now everybody's got big equipment and they're running over many, many acres. They don't have very many cows, or they've got a feed lot, or whatever the case may be. They don't use the land the same. So as a result, the habitat's different. And that's what he said. The biggest change was, in his opinion, was the high grading of the timber versus making bigger openings. And that's the average guy. I mean, obviously a deer hunter, we preach it all the time. If you're going to create habitat, you have to have big openings. You have to get a lot of sunlight to the ground. So maybe the most aggressive deer managers, they get this whole thing about, making a difference, by cutting enough stuff. But the average guy doesn't cut near enough. When they go in, they take 10 trees off an acre. They don't take, 200. So as a result, they don't really change anything, and it just stays in that mature state forever. And that's, again, that was Greg's opinion of what happened here. That's what he said was the biggest difference, was that timber harvest.
That aligns across much of the country, I'm sure, certainly across a lot of the grouse's range. What would you say, and I'm unfamiliar with Northeast Iowa, with that bluff country. I see from your videos, drone footage, it looks like there's a good chunk of timber, a lot of standing trees. What's the social licensing for forest management as a whole, but more specifically logging? Are more people against it than for it?
No, it's here. It's the land is a resource that's meant to make you money. Okay. They're all about cutting stuff.
Good.
Yeah. But again, they're cutting the high grade stuff. They're not cutting junk, because there aren't any pallet mills within a reasonable distance of my farm that I know of. So who wants that 26-inch diameter hackberry tree, or that that elm that's it's been there for 75 years? Nobody wants that stuff. So as a result, it never gets cut. So you go in there and you take the odd walnut and you take the odd oak tree, or whatever the land has to offer, and nothing's coming back. You're not getting regrowth. You're not getting forest floor regeneration of any kind. So no, everybody's for logging. This is not a tree hugging. No, it's not.
Well,
There's no anti-hunting. There's no tree hugging. This is like, go for it. But
God's country.
yeah, they're not. They're just not. They're not thinking about it in terms of habitat. They're just thinking about it in terms of, how do I maximize my income off these acres?
Yeah. There you go.
That's a bummer, because one thing we found in all this, and I mean, you kind of just touched on it, with to do any real positive change for any species, it's got to be at scale. Where I'm at here in Western Virginia, we have a pulp mill where they bring in truck after truck after truck of pulpwood, which is just more or less junk timber, trees and branches and low quality timber, which allows us to put habitat on the ground at scale. And it bums me out to hear that there's not as much of a market for that where you are, where guys, it sounds like they would be happy to cut harder if they had a place to take the wood. And that's another, that just speaks to the whole forest product market. And
I haven't seen a log truck in years with anything other than walnut on it.
Wow.
Yeah. It's because a walnut tree is going to average $1,000 here. And, an oak tree might average 50. So, guys are like, why would I cut that? Why would I even mess with it? I don't even want somebody on here. And what's a hackberry going to average? $20 a tree maybe, or something? It's like, it's hardly even worth cutting, and none of the loggers want that stuff. They're not coming knocking on your door saying, hey, can we cut your oak? Or can we cut your hackberry? You'd have to almost pay them when they're there cutting your walnut to cut anything else. I mean, they're not going to pay you. They're not there for your low value species, because there's enough high value species here in the walnut, and the market is so red hot that that's what everybody's keyed on. And maybe it's been like that for a long time. I haven't seen very many oak harvests that I can think of. And granted, I'm not a huge proponent of whacking oak, but that's just kind of an indicator that people just aren't cutting them. I mean, all I see laying on fields are walnut, and they're cutting them down to 14-inch diameter trees because they're so valuable. And until there was a market for the junk timber, it has to be done by people who are considering it for habitat, because the average guy is not going to cut it because there's no incentive there to do it.
I know that you, and I think intern, help, whatever you want to call it, you've had a couple, you guys lay down some trees, which I am happy to see. What are some, are you guys just doing kind of patch clear cuts or crop tree release? Are they equip projects, or?
Well, they're a little of everything. We don't do crop tree release. If we've got an area with a lot of oak, we cut almost everything else. And then we end up with a quote unquote oak savanna, which is pretty dang cool, because my local biologist or forester is very aggressive. He says you have to have 50% open canopy if you're serious about this. He said you can't just cut the odd tree. He said you've got to have 50% open canopy. So if you think about that, you don't just cut every other tree to get 50% open. You're going to get 5% open if you do that. You've got to cut like 50% of the trees or more to get 50% open canopy. So, he gets the what's required, and that's what he pushes, and that's what we do. But we've got a lot of oak, so it's pretty cool here because we can cut almost everything else but the oak. Because even the cherry that we've got here are scruffy looking, rough looking trees. We don't even hardly save anything. We save obviously walnut, we save oak, and here and there we save the odd big tree, but we cut down some really big stuff. And if we hit an area where we're just clear cutting, and we do hit some spots like that where there just isn't any oak, there's no walnut, there's nothing there that you really see as being beneficial, we may not cut, every single tree. We may leave the odd one here and there, or we'll do like you say, we'll make patches where we'll hollow out a 50 or 60 yard diameter area, and then we'll move 20 yards, then we'll hollow out another 50 or 60 yard diameter area and then move, but we're very aggressive on opening it up. And it's not, that's come to me over years of trial and error. I started doing TSI in 1995, so I've been doing it for a really long time, and I've seen a lot of different projects and what happens when you do it. And very rarely have I ever said, man, we didn't we cut too much. Almost never. I can't remember the last time I don't know if I've ever said it. We cut too much. It's always, man, I wish we'd have cut these trees too. Because you look at it 2 or 3 years later and you're like, this is really cool. Especially if you incorporate some burning in the rotation, you're like, wow, this is solid food. If you're, again, looking at it from the standpoint of deer, like rather than saying, well, I'm going to plant my food plots, well, I'm going to turn my whole property into a food plot. And that's what we've done, and that's the mindset that we have. So anyway, to answer your question, you've got to be super aggressive. You can't, and I have a hard time even when I'm consulting to tell somebody that they got to cut that 80-year-old tree down. So I tell them start small, pick a smaller area, and be really aggressive in a small area, and then see what you think of it a year later. And if it really bothers you, you didn't destroy your whole farm. But if you're like, wow, this is really cool, like in most situations what people do, well, then you can push it. Then you've got the blueprint. But don't just be, the fault is in being too casual in your approach and not being aggressive enough. So I would say, you have to be aggressive, but don't do it on your whole farm. Pick one little spot. Well, you get the odd guy, and I've had some that just wipe everything out, and I'm like, wow, you went for it. Place like a bomb went off here. Like I'll come back, a year later, and it's like, yeah, I mean, this is what you're supposed to do, but I didn't think you were gonna be this aggressive this quick. But
yeah, I had a guy
that like to ease people into it, ease them into it. Yep.
I had a guy. This is back, probably early 2000s. It was one of my first consults and stuff, and I told him, like, you need to cut. It was a state park looking woods, 80 acres of just state park, and being young and just told him, like, you got to go heavy. You got to be aggressive. Well, I came back a year later. He said, hey, go look at the property and I'm going to get your opinion. I showed up and it was moonscape. It was like a stick gone. He chip cut the whole farm. And I was like, I called him up and I'm like, Bob, what the hell did you do? He goes, gypsy moss. I was like, don't gypsy moss me. You saw dollars, man. Don't gypsy moss. Yeah, that was back in the early 2000s. But yeah, and it turned into the most incredible farm. It was so hard to hunt. We had so many big deer, but it was like they just were everywhere and you couldn't single them out. Oh my God, it was so hard. But man, it was so funny. Yeah. Go aggressive, but next thing you know, move, man.
Well, and there's a guy, I went to a place in southern Indiana and he paid for the farm with the trees he cut in 1 year. And I don't think it's uncommon in some areas, especially in Indiana. There's parts of Indiana where you can still do that. And I'm sure Kentucky has places like that too, where you could buy the property and you could pay for it in year 1 or year 2 with your timber cut. And, but you've got to be aggressive. And guys look at that and they say, well, why not be aggressive? I mean, I wouldn't have owned it if I wasn't cutting these trees. Well, the result is some unbelievable habitat. So that's the one advice I always have for people is you got to get to that aggressive point, but it's hard to start there. Start small and then ease your way up to it. But eventually you need to get where you're really cutting a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because a 50% open canopy is a lot of cutting.
It is. I struggle with it to this day. I'll run a saw all day during the winter and think I'm good to go. And then come this time of year, you look up and there's not as much sun getting to the ground as you thought that there were. But what you described you guys are doing, I imagine, I mean, grouse, if you were to meet with a grouse biologist or a forester, they would tell you to do what you're doing, those little patch cuts with, leaving trees standing in between, those little diversity pockets. I imagine they'll respond to that in time. As soon as it gets those stems in there, they'll respond to it in time. But I was going to ask you, or I think I mentioned it to Jordan on Instagram, messaging her because she had told me you guys have grouse drumming, and I just want to encourage you because I know you like trail cameras just as much as everybody else is, to go try and find their drumming logs and put cameras on the drumming log, because once you see those little guys up there drumming all day during the spring, you already love the bird as it is. You'll fall in love with it all over again.
Well, we used to go up to northern Minnesota and southern Canada canoeing, and it was usually a late May trip, and that's the prime drumming time up there. And gosh, when you're canoeing, you're not making any sound, unless you're talking, and you can just hear every bird, rumbling up through there, and that's pretty cool. I mean, to me, that's a wilderness sound. It's almost like an elk bugling or something like that. A grouse drumming is sort of like a reward in itself. Even if you don't see the bird, it's just a wilderness sound. So if people get addicted to that type of stewardship, if you want to call it that, then I guess we're doing our job. But it's just, I wish it was a quicker return. I wish it was, next year there's going to be 4, the year after that there's going to be 8. It's just that such a patient process, to see that payoff.
I was going to make a stupid joke like, hey, I have a dog, we can come up there and we'll do a population survey. but I mean, you're hearing, grouse here and there, but are you walking it? And I asked this question, could there be more? Just because you don't hear them drumming doesn't mean there's grouse on the property. You don't walk it like you used to. There could be a good number of grouse on the property. Just, you only hear an X, Y, and Z drummers. I mean, do you walk the property? I mean, that's a very stupid question. I think you understand what I'm saying.
We don't. Yeah, so we're not flushing birds. I have seen, I've seen grouse here, but, I do rely on my neighbor that's got a little small piece that's sort of almost like a little in-holding into our farm. And he says that he hears them and sees them. And, so if he's hearing them and seeing them and, on his little piece, then there's probably more of it going on than what I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Because when we're out there in the spring, we're running a chainsaw, and the last thing you're going to hear is a ruffed grouse drumming if you're, running your chainsaw all the time. And sometimes we'll hear them when we're turkey hunting, but I don't even turkey hunt that much. It's more, so there might be more than what I think, but I know there's at least a couple drummers, and hopefully there's more.
I think I think the nature of the bird, I think there's always more than what we see or hear. And I, on my property 2 years ago, I had the same situation, Bill. You never see them unless, if you didn't hear them during the spring, you might not even know you even got them. But, I'm always wondering, how many do I have? Do I have any? If I got 1 or 2, or there are 3 or 4. One thing I remind myself of, if you got 2 drummers, I mean, it's how God wrote it, that there's always more females than males of any species. That's just how biology works. So if you got 2 drummers, it stands to reason you got 3 or 4 hens, and if your neighbor saw a hen and some chicks, then they're in the area for sure. And if you're hearing them every year, they'll respond to the work you're doing for sure.
Yeah. And we probably need to do, like, to close up, we probably need the final step of the process is getting rid of more of the raccoons, and just getting more aggressive on that end of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that'll be really cool for you to see, and everybody listening. It's anecdotal, but seeing a kind of before and an after, if you really hit them hard for, even just 1 year right before the nesting season, I imagine it would be a noticeable difference.
We'd probably see it easier on turkeys because they're so visible. But we'd have to assume that it's doing the same thing with the grouse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know I have a lot of clients that just go very aggressive on the raccoon population, and it's immediate, the success, the increase on at least turkeys, obviously. Yeah. It's amazing. But you just got to get out there and do it. But I know you got to be probably, you got people in and out of your, still working. You're sitting there yapping. They're laying drywall, man.
Yeah, no, they're done with the drywall. I don't know what they're doing now. They're painting something, or I better go check on them before they paint my bedroom the wrong color or something.
Yeah.
Well, we'll let you go, Bill. This was appreciate your time. Number one, I do got one question for you. We ask all of our guests to end it with hopefully a good story, but we always ask if you got one, if you could point to your most meaningful or memorable, special, or experience with a ruffed grouse, hunting them when you were a kid, a flush, hearing one drumming on your new property.
There was an interesting time on one of the properties that one of the areas that I hunted where they were pushing the tops in, like the farmer was clearing timber, and he did it with a bulldozer. And they pushed them off the tops of the ridges and made the ridges tillable. Well, there were all these piles, and I had a Labrador, and I trained Labradors because I was mostly a duck hunter growing up along the Mississippi River here in northeast Iowa. And my labs were always, they could hunt upland birds too. But he was one of the very few labs that would hunt close, like close enough for grouse hunting. Like he would hunt within 10 or 15 yards of me, and he knew that he was smart enough to know that if he hunted 30 yards out, I was never going to get a shot.
Mm-hmm.
He would hunt close. Well, I can remember going into one of those pushed in ridge tops one time, and the birds were holed up way up in there, like underneath, maybe 10, 15 feet back into those piles. And he would go in after them. He would go in crawling. He would disappear. He'd be back underneath all those piles, logs and roots and all that stuff. And then, I knew there had to be a grouse there because he wouldn't have gone in there otherwise. So you just stay on the ready. And all of a sudden, out of the middle of some place, some root cluster came a flush, and so that was a pretty interesting way to hunt grouse. But it was also fun to see that Labrador, make that transition from being mostly a duck dog and sort of a secondary pheasant dog to being a grouse dog, understanding that, unless he was close to me, there wasn't going to be any shooting, and he wasn't going to get to carry any feathers. So
right.
Yeah, that was fun. Those were fun days.
Oh, for sure.
Excellent.
Good deal. Bill,
Well,
I appreciate
thanks,
your
Bill.
time, man. Absolutely. Appreciate your time, the conversation. I hope people listen to this many times over, hear what you said, and take home that stewardship message more than anything else.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. All righty, man. Well, get back to work.
Yeah, I got
Headphones
got
off,
plenty of stuff I should be doing, but yeah, thanks guys, and good luck to you and all that you do there.
Absolutely. Appreciate your
Thank you.
time.
The pressure.
Patented.
Yes.
Stretch stamp of approval. Bill
I
Winke.
said this. Yeah, I tell you what, Cody. We talked about it yesterday. Before we had him on. Of all the industry people out there, hunting industry, management, whatever, you've never heard anybody say, and I've been doing this for close to 30 years, over 30 years professionally. In all the travels, you never hear a bad word about Bill Winke.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation was just, okay, now I know why.
Yeah.
Right?
He's
That
a
was
straight shooter. Straight
Straight
arrow.
shooter, man. What that was a very enjoyable conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think how we meshed the two species together as much as we could, you can tell he's very passionate about it,
Yeah.
Man, that was fun. That was a great conversation. I'm
Yeah.
like giddy.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty impressive. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was so easy to talk to. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, knowledgeable, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that I've always watched Bill's stuff, looked up to him, admired him, whatever you want to say. One thing, watching his videos, he's a very critical or analytical thinker.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate his approach to everything, hunting, deer management, land management, all of it. And it was cool to have him communicate all that through grouse goggles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To have him advocate for what we're advocating for, and hear it to come from somebody with his mindset and approach and platform. I was just, I was excited when I saw that video last year, and I mean, not to, it's good for the Ruffed Grouse. We've always said it. If the Lakoskis or Michael Waddell could make a video about shooting does, all of us would be shooting does. If so-and-so could make a video about prescribed fire, we'd all be burning. We need voices like Bill and others, taking a stand for the little guy in this situation being the Ruffed Grouse. And there was just so much of what he said. I'm not surprised that he said it. It was refreshing to hear it from him, that stewardship approach And right off the bat, what I thought was cool, he said, I'd rather have a ruffed grouse property than a deer property.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
you and me both, my friend. And I hope people hear that and understand what he meant by it.
Yeah. Well, with all that nice things that we just said about him, he's dead to me. Let's be honest, because I invited myself to come grouse hunt on his place, and he nicely, it was a laughing no.
Yeah.
So you're out, dude.
Polite,
You're going to get your first complaint.
I'm going to go back. I don't really listen to a lot of our podcasts. I listen to them when I edit them, but after that, I don't, because I don't like to listen to myself talk. But this one I probably will, because there were so many little nuggets. You know, that stewardship was one thing I thought he said that was interesting, and I made sure to write it down, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think it's a topic worth unpacking a little bit. But how, you know, because we always talk about grouse in the good old days, 70s, 80s, 90s. We want to get back to that. He mentioned that those numbers weren't landscape scale, more or less a result of intentional management. They were there because of land use, and the birds just happened to benefit from them.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's one thing, and he touched on it now, that we need to be more intentional with our management. So, you know, a lot of guys, maybe ourselves included, we're complaining about grouse. Well, the numbers aren't what they used to be, and this state agency is not doing what they should be doing. We should be cutting more. RGS should be doing this. Gift for Grouse should be doing that. They were so good just kind of by happenstance, I think, across the landscape. I think very few people in the 70s or 80s were cutting timber for ruffed grouse. They were cutting timber, or, you know, in his situation, cattle use was different, and grouse just happened to be there. As we move forward, we can't just expect everybody to see things the way we see them. Like we gotta really put the pedal to the metal with this intentional grouse management focus, because it's never been that way. We've never managed forests or habitat or ecosystems for grouse. They were always there just by happenstance because of land use. Yeah. And if we want to do some real positive change landscape scale, we gotta be really like hyper focused, because that hyper focus for the species has never been done before. We're in new territory.
Yeah, and that's so much to unpack, and we'll save it for a good podcast or whatever. But in Ohio, the result of the population is the benefit from the downside of farming. You know, the farms regenerating into old fields, to early successional to young forest. That wasn't a program that happened.
Yeah.
That was economic. Unfortunately for the farmer and what have you, but a disturbance, if you will, something, that's costing people money was wildlife benefited from, and in the same breath, I forget what year it was, corn and soybean prices were so high. I think it was like, I'm wrong, but like, let's just say it's 2013. The corn and bean prices were so high that there was so much ground getting out of CRP because of it. Mm-hmm. People were paying the fines like, I'm planting corn, I am planting beans, the per price per bushel. And that's the point, and it saddens that, like where he lives, like there's no market. So how do you solve these effing problems, man? Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, cut. Yeah. No, what? It's such a big thing. Mm-hmm. It's such a big thing, but write that down. We need to talk about that. We need to really dive into that conversation. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, just the way he communicated it. It flipped a switch and triggered the light bulb. It's like, well, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just all the more reason to keep doing the work. It's all the more reason for everybody to get on the same page across the board, state agencies and the Forest Service and RGS and us and everybody to get on the same page and work together, because the
Yeah.
A lot's at stake, but it's we've never been here before. It's all new territory.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like let's
I think,
put our noggins together and figure it out together.
right. That's a good point. That's all good stuff, Cody. And the thing about it is the more that we have the Winkies, like you said, the Waddells, and if you make it cool, I don't care if you, of course I care. I want you to have a relationship with a species, but as long as if we can get to the point where people accept the U.S. Forest Service or doing X, Y, and Z because of that, acceptance. You don't have to do it. You don't have to even, I don't want, you know what? I just don't want you to write a letter or get on social media. We can get to that point where, Thomas Jeff and George Washington National Forest can be cut without people complaining as much. That's like, get that win. We can plug that hole just alone to where people can do their jobs without stressing out about the repercussions of it. Man, we can move the needle. And we need people like Bill Winke and all this other stuff. Who the hell's Cody Altizer and Eric Long, right? So, yeah, as long as we get the acceptance of it so people can do their jobs, that's the goal. And we just took one today. I think we took a step to that today.
Yeah, I mean, not to, again, I thought his video was huge, and it was, I think he mentioned it. It was really well received, and it was, I don't know, in terms of views. And a video like that, I always read the comments just to get a temperature of the situation, see what people are thinking and how they respond and how they feel. And like we mentioned it, I mean, people, they were eat up with it. They were like, thank you, I want to help, this, that, and the other. And, I hope he doesn't diminish, and not to sensationalize the video, but, somebody like Bill putting out a video like that, are there more grouse on the landscape because of that video? No. But it's a small step. It's putting the species in front of people that hadn't given it any thought for a while because it was out of sight, out of mind. It put the species in front of people, or the younger generation in Northeast Iowa. Bill Winke talking about grouse, maybe they had never even given it a second thought. Now they do. Like those little wins. I always reference the quote, and I don't know where it came from, but water cuts through rock, not by force, but through persistence. Like that persistence, little videos, little podcasts like that, little conversations like we just had with Bill. You can't undersell them. I mean, do they fix the problem? No, but I think they make a more meaningful difference than what we realize. We can't measure that difference. It's not tangible, but I think they do a lot of good.
And we had somebody on, wrap this up, but we had somebody on from Iowa. What's Iowa known for? And there was grouse there. You know what I mean? There's grouse there. If there can be grouse there can be grouse in a lot of places.
Yeah.
That you to have grouse. It just takes X, Y, and Z management, man. And we talked about, if you listen to Bill real quick, he talked about, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then, the 80s really was when, they were hunting them and stuff. And I talked about barren ground caribou. Oh, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. It was $1,500 to go kill two mature, biggest bulls that you can have. I'll go. No big deal. So you have that. You always think it's going to be there. Mm-hmm. And we look at species right now that he is known for, white-tailed deer. And you look outside, you go for deer drives like Cody does, and you think, how can this ever go away? It's not going to go away like the barren ground caribou. It's going to be changed to where you can't recognize it because of legislative regulations or habitat or whatever. Things are never going to be the same. And you have to learn. If we can conquer or get the ruffed grouse back on track, there's nothing we can't conquer, as conservationists. And that's what we're known for, people. Come on, man. We're the people that brought antelope, eagles, Canada geese, elk. We brought these things back. We can do this again. Come on, somebody give me an amen. Let's do this. Right?
Yeah, we just got to operate with some urgency for sure.
Right? Yeah. Anyway.
Not to get too sidetracked. Well, we don't want to steal the spotlight from Bill and the meat of the episode. And
that's right. We had him on.
I hope the deer hunters don't hate us. by the end of it because we were kind of hard on him.
It's all in context, man.
I needed to hear it.
Oh yeah. If you take that anything we said out the wrong way, that's on you. I mean, there was nothing in there we are deer hunters. My gosh, deer hunting led us to this. Come on, man. You know, and you will too. Yeah. All right,
Make stewardship cool again.
Right.
Bill Winke, 2026. Bill Winke for president, 2026.
Right.
Making stewardship cool again.
2020. Well, no, 2028. 2028. Yeah. I don't know who his running mate's going to be. You know, that's the key. That's who. If he picks a good running mate, I'll vote for him. But until then, I don't know. You know, what do you feel about gas prices? We should address that. All right, Cody Altizer. As
all
always,
I got.
Appreciate you. What's that?
That's all I got.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, thank you for all you do, Cody, and thank you everybody, to listening to the Give for Grouse podcast and supporting Give for Grouse initiative. We do have the billboard. We haven't talked about it much. We have a new one, and it is sporting. It's a little upgrade, if you will, in the appearance. Got the little facelift. Looks badass. Look on our social media if you want to take a picture of it or look at it. Excuse me. And that's still going. But other than that, as my grandpa always used to say, no hurry,